Now, if I think of it that way, then I can see that it's very important for me to look at dealing with my addictions. Can you see that? It's very important as a part of my spiritual journey. To actually get to the point where I'm not intellectually skipping over addiction, when I'm not making out I don't have them, but rather that they actually have gone from within me. Because remember I said to you, whether I'm intellectually conscious or aware that these interactions are happening or not, every unhealed causal emotion inside of me creates the addictive behaviour. This is why people tell you you have a subconscious mind. Right? Because everything you don't want to feel creates your life often. And then they say, oh, it must have been my subconscious mind that created that. No, it's actually something you can be completely conscious about that created that, which is your own feeling inside of yourself from your childhood that you did not want to feel. That's what created it. And if we can see that as, if we want to use the same terminology, that is our unconscious mind, if you like, our subconscious mind, generating a lot of our interactions and generating our law of attraction. So here I am sitting in these addictions. And maybe what we need to do is look at how it happens in practice, and just so that we can feel a bit more about how it works. You see, most of us initially, when we start talking about addictions, people go, oh, I'm not addicted to drugs, I'm not addicted to alcohol, I'm not addicted to, any substance really, I'm free of addictions. Now, if we use the terminology that I've just used and the description that I've just used with regard to addictions, how many of you are actually free of addictions? It's not. It's very hard to be free of an addiction, isn't it, under that definition? And if you can think of every physical addiction as just when the emotional addiction does not get met. So the problem with most of us is that we are meeting our emotional addictions in much of our life, right? Because of that, we have a less likelihood to have a physical addiction. So actually, the people with physical addictions are just demonstrating that their emotional addictions aren't even getting met. You follow that? And in reality, if a person has a physical addiction, often they can more rapidly access the emotional addiction that's not being met, because it's obvious to everyone around them that something's wrong. You see, the problem for the majority of us is my emotional addictions get met by you, your emotional addictions get met by me, we're both happy. We don't see that there's a problem here. But when we look at a guy who's bonged out on drugs for half of his life, we say, yeah, there's a problem. and yet I'm happy, and so I think there's no problem. But in reality, the problem is that his emotional addiction isn't getting met. That's why he's on these drugs, because he needs a physical way of getting out of these emotional addictions. And that's quite obvious. But the problem for me is I'm already getting my emotional addictions met, and I'm quite happy with it. And that's not obvious. And can you see sometimes it's actually harder for a person who's getting their emotional addictions met and who feels quite happy in their life to progress spiritually towards God than it is for the person who's down and out and has a lot of problems in their life getting these addictions met. Does that make sense? And quite often it's not so obvious. In the first century, many of the people who followed us when we were travelling around talking to people like we are doing these groups, many of the people who followed us were actually people who had heavy physical addictions. Right? Because they could see they had a problem. Right? And many of the people who attacked us were the people who were in heavy denial of their emotional addictions, because they couldn't even see they had a problem. And this is the trouble with emotional addiction, is that often we do not even see the problem that's right there. And we don't see our rage and our anger and our hurts as proof that the addiction is present. And we just don't notice those things. And if we're in a very, very close codependent relationship with somebody, we can often avoid much of the rest of the pain because there's seemingly so much joy in that relationship that we don't even notice why that relationship was created. We feel this relationship is beautiful, when in reality it's so codependent that it just makes both of us extremely happy because we're getting our addictions met. So for most of us, our emotional addictions are getting met. So we don't have to go to a physical addiction to detune from our life, to detune from the fact that things are not being met. We go to a physical addiction generally when the emotional addiction doesn't get met and we don't know how to meet it. That's often when we choose a physical addiction. Whatever that physical addiction be, it might be drugs, alcohol, it might be medicated prescription drugs, it might be painkillers, it might be TV, videos, movies, it might be partying every night, having sex all the time. Not that there's any trouble with having sex all the time or partying every night. The issue is, are we using it as an addiction to suppress a causal emotion that we had drawn up down there? That's the issue. So the emotional addiction, when it's met, doesn't generally generate a physical addiction. When it's not met, then we get the additional layer of a physical addiction. The beauty of a physical addiction, though, is it's obvious usually to everyone around us and sometimes to ourselves, not all the time, but it's obvious generally to everyone around us that we have a, quotation marks, problem, right? But the issue with this side is that it's not obvious to anyone around us that we have a problem, except generally to God and your relationship with God, because while you're in emotional addictions, you cannot get closer to God. So obviously these talks are all about being closer to God, so we want to be able to learn how to deal with the addictions, learn how to feel about them and do something with them. So let's look at some of that. But before we proceed, is everyone clear about the addictions? Is there any questions you'd like to ask about them?